really feeling like you really screwed up and like things were a sham and you're just feeling, you're kind of having a pity party, and so we carry a lot of shame and guilt as parents for messing up.
So we're so susceptible, and it's so right for us to want to understand the best practices. But at the same time, it's so certain that we won't get it right all the time. And that in fact, that we know since Winnicott that like being perfect would actually be burdensome for our kids because then they would aim for perfection themselves. And they wouldn't necessarily know that it's not attainable because they would have seen us and maybe we're hiding those moments where we failed. And so they don't understand that this was not the expectation. And so what I'm hoping for is that parents feel this freedom that it's actually good for your kids to be a B parent, to be maybe even a C plus parent, and that you're still, as long as you have a close connected relationship, you kind of are perfect. Like it's just a different definition of perfect.
I'm Dr. Elisha Goldstein, and this is Emotional Longevity. My guest today is Dr. Aliza Pressman. Aliza is a good friend, developmental psychologist, and co founder of the Mount Sinai Parenting Center. She's also the host of the award winning Raising Good Humans podcast and the author of the New York Times bestselling book, The 5 Principles of Parenting, Your Essential Guide to Raising Good Humans. For decades, Aliza has worked with parents, pediatricians, and educators, helping them translate the best of developmental science into practical, real world tools. And that's exactly what she's going to do for us in this episode. We're going to talk about why parenting isn't about perfection, but more about connection. We'll explore how understanding and managing our own emotional health directly impacts our kids, and why reflection and repair are essential parenting skills, and how small, intentional shifts in our approach can make a huge difference in our children's development. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, or just someone navigating relationships in this increasingly complex, and let's just name it, increasingly overwhelming world, this episode is packed with insights that will change the way you think about human connection, resilience, and how you can create emotional well being for the long run. This conversation with Aliza was both inspiring to me personally and incredibly practical, and I'm excited to share it with you. And now, my conversation with Dr. Aliza Pressman. Welcome, Aliza Pressman, to the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. I already feel chill just from seeing you.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know, Aliza and I have known each other for a while now, and we've been on retreat together, and we've just had a great relationship together. And so, I'm thrilled for what's happening in your life right now. I'm thrilled for your book that's come out, The 5 Principles of Parenting, New York Times bestseller. Um, and I want to get a sense just right off the bat from you. So you've had this really wonderful career, and and you got to a point where you were inspired to finally write the 5 Principles of Parenting. And so I want to get a sense from you, like what actually inspired you to do that?
I think I actually was so adamant that I was not going to write a book um, until I got to a point where I thought, I think there is a place to put everything under kind of housed under one roof in the space of developmental science, like where it's about like how the science that we kind of know can impact our kids translates. And it was starting to feel like everything is so complicated sounding for parents. And I just wanted finally to be able to deliver or translate that science in a way that let parents know it's actually not that complicated of a science, but there is science. And then when you kind of consider that alongside your own values and who you are and who your kids are, I felt like maybe this could serve parents, like, to alleviate kind of the noise and the stress of it all. So I decided to do it, but I only wanted to do it if I could really distill down the parts of this space that I can contribute to, which is the developmental science, like how we come to be who we are and how our parenting environment influences us. So I thought, okay, if I can boil it down to 5 key principles and 5 skills that we can bolster in our kids that are kind of related, then I'll write a book.
And so you didn't. So for as a parent myself with 3 kind of boisterous boys who, and, um, it can be really overwhelming at times. And so for you to come up with something that's like 5 principles of parenting makes it feel doable, makes it feel like. And so you mentioned a second ago, like these values. Um, so my experience with you and understanding is that you've been teaching certain values for years or working with people around them. What are some of these core values?
Well, it's funny because for me, when I try to work with families on, particularly parents who are just kind of trying to figure out, like, what matters to them, is that I try not to say specific values that I have because I don't want it to mess with their heads at all, but, like, I somehow know the most important values, but I do feel like I can help guide. Like, even in the book, I didn't say what my family mission statement is or family values statement, however you wanna think of it. I just talked about, like, how you can come up with your own. So that's more of my approach is, you know, what are good, like the raising good humans, what is a good human? That's something that I think we kinda know, each of us individually and maybe with our partner, but getting more specific about it so that you can kind of have a North Star for what your goals in parenting are, that was important to me, but more guiding other people to come up with their own versus telling them what mine are. Because of course, they're also changing. Like I did have a family mission statement with my core values when my kids were first born, and I definitely have abandoned that and transitioned to, a different kind of just growth. So I'm not I can't say that I know what all of our values should be. Like we should raise compassionate, kind, thoughtful kids or whatever. Different people are, I mean, that sounds great, and that might be mine, but I don't want, someone else might say motivated, intellectually robust, um, persistent kids, and someone else might say, um, financially savvy, independent, thoughtful kids. Like, there are just so many different ways to say, like, what are my core values in this household that I really want people to think about? Like, what do I really wanna lean into when I'm trying to think, "Does this matter to me?" Like, when my kid is rebelling, is it going against our core values as a family, or is it just, like, whatever, wear and tear of being a growing person? And so if it's just a little thing that doesn't kind of disrupt our core values, do I need to even make a big stink about it? Do I need it to interfere with my relationship, or can I let this go? And so I don't think there is a I mean, I think we all have basically similar sounding values maybe, but I just didn't want anybody to feel like I know, because I have no idea. I only know what's right in my family.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, people are going to have different values, and um, I like how there's like an inquiry of like discovering what somebody's values are, and that's kind of where we start.
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
the North Star here?
And I
So
think that's sorry.
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say one of the 5 principles is reflection, and I think that's part of reflecting. Like, that's part of what we know scientifically is associated with positive outcomes for young people, is having parents who reflect and can pause and think about what matters to them. So, I was more interested in how can I help you do that versus telling you exactly, what you should come up with in that reflective process.
Very wise.
And
'Cause that
so
because you might lose. You're so wise, but you might lose a whole lot of people if you just said like, "Here's the values you need to live by." But
right, right, right.
I guess the Bible does that. And
Well, no, I actually think I might gain more people because it's much more specific. I think for some
yeah.
people, I have a lot of clients who I do this, and I think this is something we do with adolescents all the time of like, do you want my advice or do you want me to kind of just riff with you? Do you want me to just listen? Like, what can I do? How can I best serve you in this moment? And I do have some clients that are like, I'm not interested in you helping me figure out what I want to do. Just tell me what you would do. And so that's kind of, and so I think there are some people that are like, just be quiet with all this inquiry and reflection and just tell me what's best for my family.
Like here's what comes up for me when you say that, and it's this there's a reality to that we're as parents, and really as people, we are living in a perpetual state of overwhelm a lot of the time right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the time of this, oh my God, we're both like, oh my God. At the time of this recording, we have a new transition of government. We have in the United States, we have these kind of global wars that are happening. We have this disruption of artificial intelligence. We have, there's so much that's not even our own personal issues yet. And
Right.
so, right, we haven't even gotten to that. And that's not even like in our home with our kids yet. And so we do just want like, just please someone tell me.
Hmm.
And at the same time, that inquiry that you speak to, it's almost like, okay, I know we need to be able to carve out the space or just see the importance. Like we do things because we have reasons. And when the reasons are strong enough, we create the space to do something.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just an issue with not understanding the reason behind it. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's true. And the reason why I wanted to include reflection as kind of one of the 5 core principles was because it's annoying when you feel overwhelmed and you're like, "Can you just tell me?" But it's also you figure out what's important to you, and then it saves you so much time because actually you don't worry about it, like, alleviates some of the noise of, like, I don't even care about like, why am I tied up in knots over this or fighting with my kids over this or even thinking about this? Because it's not in my larger picture give a shit list, excuse my French.
There's a podcast you're allowed to use French, apparently.
So, I think that that makes sense, like, if you care about it, you're going to invest more time and energy. But sometimes if you don't pay attention, you find yourself investing time and energy into things and emotions and, interactions that you don't even care about.
And in the theme of this podcast, we're talking about emotional longevity and which means that we want to support the emotional health for the long run. What's
Exactly.
emotional health defined as? Like, how do we manage our stress? Like, what's the quality of our relationships, and where do we find kind of contentment and satisfaction with life? And and when we don't know what our values are, and or we have some hidden expectations of them, and then we're out of sync with them,
Exactly.
that then we get emotionally.
Exactly. And so I it's like the time you have to take saves you the pain later, and it does influence your emotional longevity because it's like otherwise this parental burnout is out of hand. I mean, the fact that the Surgeon General had to speak to parental burnout is unprecedented. And it does call into question like, what's going on? We can't have this. It's just unsustainable. And also, I'm in an industry that can influence both positively or negatively that sense of not enoughness and parent failure and parent perfectionism and all of that. And that isn't good for your emotional longevity. And it's the most vulnerable pain point that we have. This is like at the core of our sense of who we are and what we care about. And so my job, I hope, can alleviate some of that instead of like feeding into it. But in order to do so, I do think we need to know what our values are.
Let's speak to that. A moment ago, you said this idea of perfectionism, and we all think we should live to certain standards in being parents, and we all fall short at times and multiple times.
Yeah.
I love that line in Dear Evan Hansen, musical, and your mom singing to her later, and she's like, and I'll fail again and again, and
Yeah.
then and now in the future, basically, right? I don't want to make your eyes well. So,
No, I remember when I saw that and she said that, I was like,
yeah, too. What is it about? You say that parenting isn't about perfectionism, and then you also say but it's more about connection.
Mhm.
And so, speak a bit to that if you can. Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break to check in and talk about a program that's very important to me. I've been working with people for over 20 years, and in that time, what I've realized is that uncovering emotional healing, strengthening emotional health, and building resilience works best when we're learning practical skills that are evidence based, supported by a caring community, and have access to daily guidance and support. That's why I built my emotional health coaching program. If you're someone who's ready to take your emotional health to the next level, you're tired of yo yoing around, you want to start really making real progress, whether it's building resilience, managing stress better, or simply feeling more balanced, you can get a free consult for the program. Just click the link in the description below to schedule your session and learn how we can support you. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Because it is true, there is a totally appropriate, um, kind of desire to be perfect in this area where you're like, "I'm gonna do the best I can." It has to be especially if you're, you know, if you are interested, if you're listening to anything that's about emotional longevity or anything. Most people listening to podcasts aren't doing it because they don't want to do better, right? So we're so susceptible, and it's so right for us to want to understand the best practices. But at the same time, it's so certain that we won't get it right all the time. And that in fact, that we know since Winnicott that like being perfect would actually be burdensome for our kids, because then they would aim for perfection themselves, and they wouldn't necessarily know that it's not attainable because they would have seen us, and maybe we're hiding those moments where we failed. And so they don't understand that this was not the expectation. And so what I'm hoping for is that parents feel this freedom, that it's actually good for your kids to be a B parent, to be maybe even a C plus parent, and that you're still, as long as you have a close connected relationship, you kind of are perfect. Like, it's just a different definition of perfect. And so whenever somebody says to me, and I do talk about this story in the book of this mom, Eleanor, whom I adore, who's in one of my mom groups, and she was so upset because she had planned this perfect thing with her daughter, and her daughter was so upset because it didn't go well. She was in a show, and she basically forgot her lines and messed up, and then she was devastated, and she's sharing with her mom how upset she was, and her mom was asking, like, "How do I fix this humiliating experience she had?" And I was like, "But we just found out how incredible this is. She had a really hard experience, and she shared with you what's going on for her. That is the thing. Like, that relationship is it. That's the protection. It's not to fix the hard feeling or the experience. That's not the perfect parenting. It's that she came to you." So I think that's just the reminder over and over when we are thinking like, how do I get this so right? How can I be perfect at this? That our mere presence, more often than not, so not even 100% of the time, because we know that we can't always be available and present, as you know, far more than most of us, like, you can't do it.
Yeah, and I certainly don't. Yeah,
But that you could do it more often than not, and that's the bar, and that is actually associated with such positive outcomes. That's not that high of a bar. It's a real shift, and it's much better for our kids. And it's not perfect. It's quite a bit imperfect. And when we get too imperfect, where there's like real bad ruptures, we make repairs, and that grows these relationships. And this science is decades old. It's not like innovative and new. It's just, it keeps getting replicated. And now that we can see things with neuroscience versus just the sort of more social science version of it, I think people buy into it more. But it's old science that's just getting more and more, um, legs, I guess.
Yeah, we need your voice to be able to express it and teach it in a particular way that we can hear it. And I'll never forget. I always tell the story of when I first read. Um, I was going to say Rick Hansen, but it's not Rick Hansen. It was Richard Carlson. His book "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff." It's all small stuff. And you remember that book?
I totally don't
Yes.
remember that book.
Yes. So I remember when I got that book. I was in my early 20s, and I was reading it, and I'm like, you know what? None of this is new to me, but the way it was said landed on me in a particular way that it all. I was like, I love this book, and it was really impactful for me. So, but you're I think what you're talking about too comes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, which is if we can hold top of mind that one of the values that we have in our reflection that we do, which is only one of your principles, apparent, and so we got to get to the rest of them, but is connection. Then we know we don't have to be a perfect parent. I mean, this is kind of what I'm hearing you say. We don't have to be a perfect parent. What we need to focus on, what needs to be top of mind, is that connection is really what matters. And we can be imperfect, but if we can come back to that connection, which we'll talk about repair later, but we can
Yeah,
come back to that connection, then that's what truly matters.
exactly. And it's actually so it's the first principle. I mean, I call it relationship as like the R because I just wanted things people could remember the name of. But I said you can hear it in other ways like connection, attunement. There's so many different ways, sensitive caregiving. There's so many different ways to say it, but it's just like if you keep leaning into how's my relationship going? And this is not just true in parenting, it's true in any interpersonal anything. Um, it's so protective to the point where when people ask, is this stressor going to ruin my kids? And what we've recently experienced the LA fires. And it's so heartbreaking how many parents are asking me, like, is this trauma going to destroy my kids? And I keep reminding them, we have research as far back as World War II that when these stressors happen in the presence of one loving caregiver, where there's just enough of a connection, enough of a relationship that the child feels safe to be themselves, to talk about what's going on, or to not talk about what's going on, but to know that there's someone who's stably around, they actually move the categorization of the stressor from toxic to tolerable, which is exactly where I would put these fires in that context. But in the absence of those relationships, it's not good. It can be really harmful.
It reminds me of a study that came out years ago by this guy named Jim Rohn at the University of Virginia, and he had these women who opted into this particular study, so self-selected into it, and they would sit in, and it was an MRI machine, and they put these bracelets around their ankle, and the bracelets would deliver a shock. And they were studying what was happening in relationship with the shock, and what they found was, when they shocked the ankles, there'd be this stress response in the hypothalamus. So they got really stressed in the moment, and then they had a stranger come and hold their hand while it was happening. And there was a little bit less of a activation than a loved one. And depending on the degree of the perceived connection between the two people, there was the same correlative impact where a deactivation of the hypothalamus. So this reminds me, like during the fires or during any kind of like traumatic event, if people are listening to this and there's a hurricane or a flood or there's something else kind of going
Yeah.
on wherever you are, that connection actually deactivates the stress response. And so even just remembering that study reminds me to hold my kids' hands during difficult moments or to put my hand on them in some ways. Sometimes now that now in their teenage years,
Yeah.
it's a little bit different.
Sometimes you have to find a different way in when they're teenage days, but same idea, some connection.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of being a parent and overwhelm and our emotional dysregulation that a lot of us experience on the regular, right?
What?
So, what you, me?
Okay.
Um, so we can say that parenting's a bit of an emotional marathon, you know, for the long haul, How do you see the I know you actually you also have your own history and education and around like mindfulness and mindful parenting. Or what do you see as things that are supportive in helping regulate in a sustainable way for us around our emotional health during all that?
So, well, now we've covered relationship and reflection, and regulation is the third principle. So this is kind of mapping to it's all this it all makes sense together, right? And for me, I really want people to believe, because I get a lot of questions about how do I teach my kids to self-regulate? Like, that's a big topic, and I can't stress enough, I think we can't stress enough how important it is for our capacity to regulate as the co-regulation that we're kind of lending to our young people versus trying to give them the skill. Although I talk about the skill and things that we can do to develop the skill, and mindfulness practices are certainly among the top items. Um, so I did kind of, nobody approved this, but I did micro meditations because I what all the feedback I get from, which I called self-regulation exercises, because I got feedback from my publishers that meditation would be a turnoff for a lot of people, depending on who's reading the book. And so I said, that's fine. I'll just call them self-regulation exercises because it's psychological. Exactly. Even though it's all the same, it's like, what do you connect with? What makes sense for you? And so for parents, I I think we have to keep reminding ourselves, look, I'm even while we're talking, putting my hand on my heart because even thinking about it, I get like I naturally move toward what can I do to soothe myself. So I just want everyone, I look at it as like the passcode to your internal kind of alarm system. And like when I moved here, got an alarm system because when you come from New York City, which is so weird to other people, but to people in New York City, it feels so safe to be in an apartment building with lots of people. And then moving to a house, I was like, this is crazy. I'm alone in a house with my children, and this doesn't make any sense. I've got to get a really epic alarm system. And I remember the first time I went in and I heard that like beeping sound that kind of lets you know that you have to punch in the passcode before the police are notified, and the fire trucks come and the ambulance like everybody's gets the emergency message. There's a certain amount of seconds of just a slow beep where you have to punch in the passcode. And when that happened, I was like, if we can all figure out what our passcode is, and all of us have different passcodes, we have the key to turning off our false alarms, which is essentially self-regulating, because we can distinguish between real and imagined threat. We can get back to a regulated state, and then we can parent our kids from that place instead of from a mindful place or self-regulated, whatever you want to say, whatever makes it.
An intentional present space, like,
Yes.
something like that.
So I realized for me, I know that there are a few things that work for me when I can sense that beeping is happening. And I know that there are certain physical cues. Like my hands clench before the rest of me does when I'm about to lose it. That's just something I learned over time, observing that, like, this is if you want to know if I'm getting mad, look at my hands. And that might be very different from someone else who might have very relaxed hands, but their jaw is clenched. Whatever it is, find the thing that is the beginning physical clue that you are not going to handle this really in the way that you wanted to if it keeps going. And from that, like, the earlier you can capture it and punch in your passcode, and for me, that passcode almost always has to do with breath. And if not, I will put my hands under cold water. And if not, I will just put on a song that I know takes me out of whatever is happening for me. So for me, Queen is always gonna get me back to a place where I just get into a different state. Whatever that shift that has to happen is, if you can find it, that's your passcode, and that is gold. So, of course, in my book and in my work and in all of our work, we have suggestions for what might be really like what might resonate. I know in meditation, like loving kindness was the first one that really clicked for me. So I was like, "Ooh, I like that one. That one resonates for me." But everybody's gonna have a different passcode. I just want everybody to find theirs.
By the way, I love that term. I mean, that's like you kind of came up with that kind of idea. Like, what's your passcode?
Right.
It's like, I like that, right? Like, what's your key? What's your passcode? What's
It's
your
quick.
it's quick and it's memorable. It's like, okay, I can get it. It's part of my modern everyday life type of thing. So it was a good. I think that was smart. And I'm hearing you say like that parenting or just living with intention, like with being intentional um, and aware can help you reduce your stress. And if you as a parent can do that for yourself, first of all, that's great, job well done, just as a human,
Yeah,
but but you're also modeling that to your kids,
that's right.
and that and my understanding of all this stuff of the whole longevity field as well is that stress overwhelm is associated with um, higher blood pressure. Our body is working faster and harder. And if our body is working faster and harder, we're probably aging a little bit as a result of that because it's working harder and we're more susceptible to, cellular inflammation and disease. And so if we can do that, not only are we like doing well for ourselves psychologically, but also modeling this with a parent, but we're also potentially saving our physiological lives a little bit.
No, for sure, because we can't be in a state of chronic stress. It's so bad for you. It's just we know, it's just terrible for you. So you have to figure out passcode, a system in your body to get you back to 0, and then we'll go through it again many, many times. Um, so it's not like we're sitting around just chill, but it's the capacity to go back to it. It's just knowing that you can get back there, I think really can change, and also that we can practice and get better at it, and that it's not, if it's not natural to you, it's certainly I grew up in a very yelly household. Now it wasn't scary, so that's different. Like, I think it's important to distinguish between a household where there's a lot of, like, loud voices, but, like, no one actually cares because 'cause they're so used to it, but it's not that they're resigned to it so much as, like, it's just a loud household. So it's not that everybody has to present as, like, super calm and everything's fine, but it's more like, do you and your kids know that ultimately you are in control for the most part of your your nervous system? And I mean, not totally in control, like, but able to kind of grab hold of it? Or are you, the non-scientific way of saying it, unhinged a lot? And if you are, that yelling is scary. It's scary for your children and your partner and your colleagues, and it's just it can then create this problem where you're in this chronic state of stress and then the people around you are in a chronic state of stress. So it's not like everybody needs to have the same personality. And it's not that I've not yelled before, I certainly yell, but, like, when I do, first of all, I'm not proud. Second of all, my children usually laugh at me because it sounds ridiculous, and I'm glad because as much as there are moments when I would like them to be a little bit scared of me, I prefer them not to be scared of me because that is not great for relationships, and it's not great for truth telling, and it's not great for alleviating stress and all the things. So I don't even know what I'm saying other than I'm not suggesting that we all need to be so self-regulated that we like have robot personalities, but just that we are confident in our capacity to come back to it, to lean into the things that we know can get us out of this what feels like a chronic state of stress.
Yeah, and if we can find small things like you're talking about, like our passcode, right? We can be aware of, in my language, it's like, how where are you bracing? we can be aware of. And for you, by the way, and Elisa, next time I see you, I'll be looking for those hands just to see, is everything okay?
Exactly.
So but if we can kind of notice like the physical signs of being a little bit like imbalanced, emotionally imbalanced, then that could be a wake up. We get into that, we step into that space between stimulus and response where we can do in choice. And in that space and that choice point, we can insert what you're talking about, which is like, okay, well, what's my passcode? Then that it's sort of like even that languaging, what I like about it is it sort of kind of neutralizes the intensity of it, like my and so it's like, oh, this, my hand on my heart, okay. For me, like lowering my shoulders, or okay, it's connecting with this person or talking. What's this kind of like a tiny shift or micro shift I can make in what I'm attending to that can be can support my emotional sanity, balance, health. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's surmountable when it's micro. It's surmountable when you think of it as a passcode because you're like, it's a given that there are going to be alarms that are going to go off. It's a given. But or it's a given that they're going to almost go off and actually this morning I forgot. I opened my door to let my dog out and it was so loud. So I closed the door, I put the passcode on. All was well. But it was so disorienting for a moment, and it's such a good metaphor because, again, I was like, "Okay, whoa, I forgot, but I definitely don't want security to come because I just forgot. So I'm gonna I it's not too late, and it's never too late. It's just ideally, when you start to think about it, it's just like it happens, but it's not end of days. There's a way to manage it. You just have to find that way and come back to it. And sometimes you won't, and that's okay. And I think when you have micro moments and micro meditations and micro practices, it's also like you don't have to think about it in terms of all the cliches of the way you have to or don't have to be mindful. It's not as heavy. All of this, parenting, mindfulness, the whole thing is lower lifts than we realize because I think it's intimidating otherwise. And then you just throw your hands up and you're like, forget it. And that's no good because we know that these micro moments add up.
Yeah, just like a muscle, just like anything else. It's just like nature. When you intentional practice of repetition of something allows it to become, our brain memorizes it. It becomes more of a procedure that becomes more implicit to us. A moment ago, or a little bit ago, you were talking about, or we had mentioned the importance of repair. Right? It comes back to the connection. I I want to bring this back and put it in your lap for a second because um, every time that I mention something like this to a couple or a family or anything like that, it's still a really an aha, like that you can be imperfect, and this is the part that really matters. And so, say more about that in relationship to how it comes alive in your book and what you know about it, that whole process.
Okay. So repair is one of the 5 principles, and you really make it easy. But I think that that's because they're very, like, aligned with the science, so it all makes sense. But I think repair is so cool to me because the original research by Ed Tronick was looking at infant-parent interactions, but, like, now we've seen it in adult relationships and parent-child relationships. It's across the board, repair keeps coming back to, um or keeps coming back as this key feature of healthy, strong, robust relationships. And so what I think is the most important about it is that without repair, in the absence of repair, you cannot have a strong relationship. Well, okay, if you can't have a strong relationship without repair, that means you can't have a strong relationship without ruptures. You just can't. So it's another ad for being imperfect to have the opportunity for repair. So that's one thing that I really want to emphasize is that similar to go back to when you mentioned building muscles, you also have to have those small tears in your muscles, not huge ones where you're breaking things all over the place, but the small tears so that you can grow your muscle so it can get stronger. Otherwise, if you don't do any of the weightlifting and tearing of the tiny tears of the muscles, you don't have strong muscles. You can't. There's no other way to do it. So, the most important thing about repair is considering that you need discord and rupture in order to have the opportunity for repair. So that's why I want anytime when there is discord and rupture in the family for everyone to give themselves a small, tiny pat on the back for investing in repair. Because I do think, and I had a personal experience with my daughter where I almost gave up on repair, where we had our biggest brawl that we've ever had. And I was like, it was not that long ago, frankly. And she's just
So
about
we can still be imperfect. We can
yeah, I'm still going strong and imperfect. She is about to turn 18 in 2 weeks. Um, and I got so mad at her about something that I actually am not a big yeller, and I really laid into her, and I did so in a way that I would not recommend to other parents who came to me for guidance. It's not the advice I give. I, like, fully called into question who she was, not just her behavior, but I, like, officially shamed her. And I, of course, then stormed away and burst into tears because 'cause I'm like, "That is, in my almost 18 years of being her mother, the absolute worst I've ever been." I was completely certain that it was gonna be the fight that informed who she was gonna become. She would think back on it. I, like, really spun out, and I called my husband, who was my fiancé at the time, and I said, "I've done it. I am a sham of a person. My whole job is baloney because I just ruined my relationship with my child, and she's gonna be blah, blah, blah." And he was like, "What would you say to somebody who called and told you this?" And I said, "Well, what I would say to them is repair, because that's the most important thing, and if you can repair after that kind of rupture, the relationship is only gonna grow stronger, but that's baloney, and I'm over it, and it's all a lie." And I was just so, I was so
You're caught in a shame loop. You're caught
so in a loop.
yeah.
So I get off the phone with him and I'm like, "Okay, I have to take a breath and figure out," like, I literally was doing all the things. I was looking for 5 things that I could see and 5 things that I could touch and 5 things that I could smell in the room. I was trying to ground myself in any way that I could, but I was just like, "Is it all a lie? Like, is this whole thing a sham?" And then my daughter came in my room, and I was sitting on my bed at the time, and she's like, "You probably wanna repair this, huh?" That's all she said, and she kind of smiled, and I said, "I do. I'm so sorry about that. Like, I am so sorry. I love you so much, and I don't know what in the world that was." And she, like, talked to me about it for maybe 30 seconds where I thought she'd want a deep dive, and then she started telling me a story about, like, something going on with her friends, and basically, we repaired. Like, she was laughing and moving on, and I realized it's real. She felt safe enough that we could have that kind of rupture, which I felt was, like, too big, and that was it. Like, she knew that we could come back together because repair isn't about apologies and this and that. It's about reconnecting after this little disconnect, and it happened, and I was like, "Oh my god," not to get nerdy, but it's so exciting to find out that this is real. Like, it is, and it's, like, magnificent about humans. It's just magnificent that you can invest in a relationship to such an extent that when those blow-ups happen and when you make these mistakes, you really can repair and grow stronger. I'm not recommending shaming your kids and yelling at them, like, that's not a good idea, but if you do, how nice that we have this beautiful thing called repair, and it really is just connection.
I have 2 things, to say about that. First, of course, we don't need to intentionally create
Yeah,
disrepair.
it happens at
We're gonna do it anyway, we're gonna do it
yeah.
anyway. But the second thing is, I found in your story, um, the fact that when you came back to her and said, like, "You probably wanna make repair," is a bit of a is a testament to what we were talking about earlier for you as a parent. because you must have modeled something that ingrained in her that, this is the
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
the expectation.
It wasn't all broken. Like,
Ah.
she really knows that in her bones, which makes me so I was like, "I am not proud of what I did, but I am proud that, like, we got through this because it's baked into our relationship." So, I'm not proud of this. I don't wanna brag about it because it's pretty awful, like, shame like, I felt deep shame, but I also wanna tell parents, like, with all of the training and all of the things, I am still blowing it all the time, but this is what we do.
Mhm. Yeah, but coming back, I mean, you came up with these principles for a reason. These made sense to you as something that you integrate, and the imperfection is part of the story
Yeah,
that we've been talking about here. So there it is. So it's part of your story too.
yeah,
It's alive. It's all alive.
it's all
What
alive.
what have we what have we gotten to so far as the principles?
Well,
Where
we've gotten all except for one.
okay.
So we have relationship, reflection, regulation, and repair, but we didn't talk about rules.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Talk to us about that.
So rules in the absence of relationship are really just controlling and not going to be great because you can tend to get kids who will want to lie to you because they're more afraid of you than they are interested in being safe, for example. But today in the culture, I think a lot of people are afraid of rules because they think it undermines relationships. And I only said rules because it's an R word, but what I'm talking about are boundaries and limits. I just wanted it to be easy to remember.
Okay. I like that. You know.
But if you think of the boundaries and the limits that we need to set in order for our kids to be separate people who live their own rich lives and also who understand that they need to be members of society, like contributing members and also not nasty members. You have to have rules. Like they can't just kind of do as, it's not just about them. It has to also be about your whole household, your whole community, the wider world. So you can't do that if everything is about the relationship to such an extent that you're afraid that if your kids don't like some, some limit that you set and they cry, for example, or they yell or whatever, that you don't have the strength of your values and you're knowing what they are to be able to say, I understand that this is not pleasant for you and I'm not changing it because I actually know that this is appropriate and right, which is not the same thing as because I said so and I'm in charge and I control you, but it is we are parents and our kids need to know that in order to be a member of the world, you need to know that you're not the only person and that the rules are there to keep other people and you safe, both emotionally and physically. So you can't just go, hitting somebody over the head because you didn't like what they said. And you can't just decide that you want to throw trash on the ground because you don't feel like picking it up. That's not cool. If you didn't have a close relationship and you just focused on the rules, it wouldn't go very well. But in the context of a close connected relationship, I think the confidence for parents to say, you're not going to like this because it's a rule. Who likes rules? But I'm not my job is to help you grow into a person who can have healthy close relationships with other people because you know what boundaries are and that you don't put other people or yourself in danger because you have appropriate limits. And so I'm not going to worry that if you don't like it, it means that our relationship is over. So I have to change the rules because it's like you align your rules with your values. So that's why I think don't waste a rule. Don't make a rule for no reason. Like I think you can have a couple rules for no reason. I had a couple weird rules for no reason, but too many of them, they
It
don't.
goes back to the imperfection thing. Like we
Yeah.
sometimes we kind of rub rules out. If you're going to do this, you're going to lose that, and we're like, okay, it's
Yeah.
not really connected, but right. So we can.
This is what I'm doing.
But this comes back to the reflection piece a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so why am I having this particular rule? Like,
Yeah.
and then what I'm hearing you say is it could be containing to, especially younger kids, or maybe even teens at times. It could be kind of continue. You're also modeling in the world there are boundaries, and you will uh, have those later on.
Yeah.
I always tell my kids, I'm like, listen, if I speed down at like 100 miles per hour, I'm gonna get there's gonna be a consequence for this. There's gonna be a ticket. There's a rule. There's a boundary there,
Exactly.
right? And so we're just kind of learning about these things.
And if you do that at 100 miles an hour, the lucky thing is that you get a ticket. You could also get into an accident and harm someone or harm yourself way more than if you were going 50. So, like, these aren't arbitrary. They're
Yeah.
purposeful, and you also have to know how to follow a rule. Like, you don't wanna send your kids out into the world and have them be in a relationship or, have a job where everybody's like, "Who is this person?" They are so unable to collaborate because they've just never had the discomfort, frankly, and frustration of rules.
And my biggest reframe for when if when I ever get a ticket is always like, well, if I hadn't gotten a ticket, I might have kept speeding. I could have gotten in an accident. So, this is
That is a fantastic reframe.
right. As as parents, we sometimes feel like we're like you were talking about earlier that wonderful story that you had with your daughter, and the I think what I wanted to kind of like just call back to for a second with that is, so there you were, um, really feeling like you really screwed up and like things were a sham, and you're just feeling you're kind of having a pity party, and so we carry a lot of shame and guilt as parents for messing up. So what's your you mentioned like some things. If we can go back to this like um passcode thing, the when we do feel that way, how do we reframe that as an opportunity for growth for us as parents too? Are humans as well? Like what's your where we go with that?
I mean, you just did. Every one of those, I think just saying, "This is an opportunity for growth." Hand on heart, this is an opportunity for growth, and I can either go into a shame spiral because I blew it, or I can think, "Wait a second. Wait a second. What did I learn here? What can I do about it?" And this is an opportunity for growth. I also like to say things like, you know, I it's not even the best that I can, but, like, I am the parent that my child needs, and I have to remember that because there are times when I'm like, "I wish I had a a number of skills," among them cooking, like, any athleticism whatsoever, like, things that would make me, I think, a really more pleasant mother, but then I remind myself, like, I'm the parent my child needs, and this moment is an opportunity, and I think when you just reframe all of these things as opportunities, it just gives us a chance to have, like, breathing room, frankly.
Yeah, and what I think the part of your message that I also appreciate is how in doing that for us as parents, it's not really only for us. We're also teaching our kids like how to be kind to themselves too, how to give themselves some grace, how to see something as an opportunity, or how to see something as like this is making me an opportunity. I can get stronger as a result of this. And I think when you went back with your daughter and had that repaired, that was also in a relational way that also just sent that message. And
Yes.
yeah,
And it has to, because, like, otherwise the message is, I'm berating myself. I'm not giving myself grace. I'm not even focused on reconnecting and repairing because I'm too busy berating myself. And then do I want her growing up making a mistake like that and then not even recovering because I couldn't myself? So, and all of this is like, and the reason why I chose 5 principles, of which is such a bold thing to say, but the reason they are all noticeably in our control as parents and have nothing to do with changing our children's behavior, but inadvertently they will, because that's how you do. It's just we are only in control of ourselves on a good day or in a good moment. So I wanted to choose things rooted in science that we can actually do something about. And if you choose something that's about your kids, you can't do anything about it. You could yes, there are activities that you could do to help them learn skills, but in the end, these these opportunities are for us. And the benefit is for all of the people that we are hoping to have close relationships with.
Yeah, I love that. If in bringing this to a close, because I think we'll kind of bring that to that place here. If parents could take away one insight that you would want to kind of toss to them for today, what would that be?
Um, I would like for all of us to believe that all feelings are welcome, all behaviors are not, which is kind of like the shorthand for relationship and rules. Because
Yeah.
that way we don't blow it and then give up.
So in that way, what I'm hearing you say, in that way, that's a full some a mindset for resiliency.
Yes.
Yeah. If we do blow it, we don't give up. Right.
If we do blow, we don't give up. We can't give up. That's the other cool thing about being parents. It's baked in that you have to keep on going. You have to be persistent because what are you going to do? You can't just not be, you can't just be like, I'm done. I'm not good at this. So I'm done.
Right.
You're
I'm
kind
out.
of, yeah,
Had my free trial now. Now I'm good.
exactly. So, but I think also when you think about all feelings are welcome, all behaviors are not, it's a shorthand to, right, I can be there for my child through whatever they're feeling. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna be like, "Oh, and you can also tear apart the world and light a fire," you know? Maybe I shouldn't reference fires, but you you can't it's a shorthand for, "Okay, did I honor the feeling? Did I accept?" Because you can't what are you gonna do? It's a feeling is there it's theirs to own. And also, was I clear about what behaviors are okay and not okay? Alright, that's basically parenting.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. So I share with people all kinds of wonderful things about you in the introduction and things that you're doing. But share with us a little bit about where people can find you, what you're up to, how they get your resources that will support them.
So I am easy to find on I'm not so it sounds so lame, but I am very easy to find on Instagram, um, at Raising Good Humans podcast, and I have a Substack where which is free, dralizapressman.substack.com, and, I have a podcast called Raising Good Humans, and I have a book called The 5 Principles of Parenting, um, and if you go to Mount Sinai Parenting Center website, we have a ton of free resources for parents of 0 to 5. So it's targeted at a much younger set and for, pediatricians as well. So basically, depending on how you like to receive information or support, I try to give different ways, um, to support families and the providers who care for them.
By the way, all of these resources, just a reminder to everyone, are very well received. And so you should definitely check them out because a lot of other people do and are getting support from them. And so thank you for putting those out there and for your wonderful book and the 5 principles of parenting. And yeah, I look forward to doing this again sometime. Thanks for
Mm,
coming.
thank you for doing this. I'm so glad you're doing this and bringing, everybody I mean, this is the stuff.
This is the stuff. All right. See you soon. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.